Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Crystal?
Indeed, we do. Many big things that are happening this week. So we had big SCOTUS oral arguments yesterday about a case that is absolutely vital to free speech. And bad news did not appear to go well for Team Free Speech. Also, the Don Lemon versus Elon Musk interview also did not go that well for free speech. So we'll show you some of the lowlights, highlights, whatever you want to call it, from that interesting moments. RFK Jr. has apparently chosen his vice presidential pick. There are some reported out rumors about who that may be. That announcement is set for next week in Oakland, so we tell you what we know there. We also want to break down, this is actually incredibly consequential, huge landmark shift in the housing market that could completely upend the entire real estate industry. Not a lie, not a joke, as Joe Biden would say. Not a joke. So we'll get into that and what that could mean for you. We also have some more disturbing details about the death of that Boeing whistleblower. You just cannot believe the latest things that have come out. We're also taking a look at the latest out of Israel. They have once again raided Al-Shifa Hospital. We'll break that down for you. We have a new report about the extent of the famine and starvation that is being caused by Israel in the Gaza Strip. And the Biden administration making some very noteworthy comments, calling out Bibi directly as they escalate their rhetorical concern for civilians in the Gaza Strip. I'm also going to do, this is going to be whatever. I'm going to break down that big debate from Lex Friedman. It was Destiny, Norm Finkelstein, Moeen Rabbani, and Benny Morris, who's an Israeli historian. It was very interesting. I'm taking a look at some of the building blocks of Israeli propaganda as on display during this debate. So
excellent. I'm excited for that. It's going to be long, just a heads up for everybody.
It took me a long time to put together. The freaking debate was 5 hours long. Right. So I promise my monologue will be a lot shorter than the debate itself was.
Well, I think, personally, first, it was like the meme whenever I saw the run length where it's like, I'm happy for you, I'm sorry for you, I'm not sure what happened, but I ain't reading all that. That's personally how I felt.
Kyle and I had a long drive down to South Carolina, so we just knocked it out.
Well, then I'm very happy that you are taking the time to synthesize it for everybody. Before we get to that, thank you to everybody. Couple of things. Number one, on the emails to our premium subscribers. We are working on it. Maintain. Continue to watch your inbox. Everything should be delivered correctly today. If it is not, just send us an email and we will try and figure it out for you. Number two, as we teased yesterday, we do have big announcements coming for our premium subscribers. In particular, you're going to want to sign up at breakingpoints.com. You're looking at a major upgrade in our premium service. We cannot get into all of the details, but for those who are with us, you are really going to enjoy it, and it's just really going to be better for you. So breakingpoints.com, as I said, you can sign up today, and we have the discount that is going on.
Indeed.
Let's start with the Supreme Court. As Crystal said, Team Free Speech didn't do so well before the Supreme Court. We've put together some elements from the audio of the actual hearings where the case that was brought forward was won by two Republican attorney generals against the Biden administration, stemming from 2021. That case revolves, if people are familiar, for example, White House officials contacting social media companies and pressuring them to censor and take down what they alleged was COVID-19 misinformation. So we have two kind of sides of the different arguments to see how they were received before the court, and then we'll break down even more of it afterwards. First, let's start with Justice Samuel Alito kind of coming down on the free speech side. Let's take a listen.
Exchanged between the White House and other federal officials and Facebook in particular, but also some of the other platforms. And I see that the White House and federal officials are repeatedly saying that Facebook and the federal government should be partners. We're on the same team. Officials are demanding answers. I want an answer. I want it right away. When they're unhappy, they curse them out. There are regular meetings. There is constant pestering of Facebook and some of the other platforms, and they want to have regular meetings. And they suggest, they suggest rules that should be applied, and why don't you tell us everything that you're going to do so we can help you and we can look it over. And I thought, wow, I cannot imagine federal officials taking that approach to the print media, our representatives over there. If you did that to them, what do you think the reaction would be?
Yeah, well, he's actually making a pretty good point there, Crystal. Imagine if a government official ever came to us and was like, hey, how about you change some of your talking points and the way they think? I mean, maybe they would do it to us because we're not as established in their eyes, but they could try and do it to the New York Times. The New York Times would probably just publish the entire thing. It would never be treated that way. I thought it was an important point from Samuel Alito because what he is ascribing there is he is saying and noting both the Facebook role as a publisher and then noting also the Biden administration's the way that the norms have evolved such that they have different ways they might deal with the New York Times, for example, as opposed to a mass platform of communication for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is the government does communicate with the New York Times, especially when they're reporting out something that contains potentially classified information and there's a question of whether it could harm national security. There is a give and take there. But I think what he's getting to is that the extent and nature of the communications here, the amount of basically badgering from the government when it came to these platforms is way beyond what you would think was appropriate when it comes to other more traditional media. And we would understand it more clearly as wildly inappropriate if these types of communications, swearing, badgering, constant meetings, not just, okay, vis-a-vis this one particular story, let's make sure that we're not harming national security, but on a variety of topics and consistently over time, we would easily see that as inappropriate when it comes to the New York Times, the Washington Post. Yet because it's social media and we get sort of like fuzzy in our head about what these platforms are and what they mean to society, then it becomes entirely less clear.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so then to show everybody the counter side of how it looks is Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson, talking and raising about how the First Amendment may actually be an obstacle then to important functions of the government. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
So my biggest concern is that your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways in the most important time periods. I mean, what would you have the government do? I've heard you say a couple times that the government can post its own speech, but in my hypothetical, kids, this is not safe, don't do it, is not going to get it done. And so I guess some might say that the government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country. And you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot manifest itself in the government encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful information. So can you help me? Because I'm really worried about that because you've got the First Amendment operating in an environment of threatening circumstances from the government's perspective, and you're saying that the government can't interact with the source of those problems.
So as you can see, using and kind of worried that the First Amendment is going in front of the government's ability to at least coerce agencies, social media companies, and others to censor information that they don't like. Let's put this up there on the screen. Unfortunately, Justice Jackson's line of questioning and the skepticism of it seemed to really carry the day from all of the write-ups of the correspondents that were present for the multi-hour arguments. What they really note is that the vast majority appeared to believe that with the way that this ruling and the merits of the case were brought forward, that the solicitors of these Republican states were not able to demonstrate what a clear and extended harm would be like, and that furthermore, what they were really worried about was, quote, hamstringing the government power. It's very likely that a conservative justice, at least a majority of conservative justices, will rule with the liberal justices, and that this will come out in favor of the Biden administration, Crystal.
Yeah, I frankly find the type of language that she was using there terrifying.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I find it terrifying. Right. I mean, what she said is, my biggest concern is that your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways. That is part of what the First Amendment is about when it comes to ensuring First Amendment rights for the citizens of this country. And nothing about this case says that the government can't put out there, part of this had to do with COVID and the COVID vaccine, right? Nothing says the government can't put out their view of the vaccine, their recommendations with regard to the vaccine, whatever information that they want. That is not being constrained whatsoever by what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is them pressuring and badgering and in some ways implicitly threatening these social media companies to toe their line and quash the speech of individual citizens who have a different view that they want to express. That's what that comes down to. So the view that seemed to, rule the day or win the day on this court, and not just from Ketanji Brown Jackson, although I thought her, reasoning here was particularly terrifying, was that no, the government's rights to censor and control information that they deem as bad, as if they have a monopoly on truth, that is the thing that we're going to prioritize. And I find that wrong. I find it horrifying. I think that it is a slippery slope. And I think it also, Saagar, really ignores something that liberals like Ketanji Brown Jackson would clearly see in a different setting, which even if the government is not directly saying, like, we're going to pull your contracts, we're going to shut you down, we're going to break you up if you don't do what we say, because the government is so large and does have those powers within it, the very nature of those conversations contains a power dynamic that is implicitly threatening in and of itself. And I think that piece was also completely ignored here. And again, I think, usually liberals see those power dynamics and ascribe a lot of merit to them. Here, that all seems to be completely invisible. One other thing I wanted to point out, which is just kind of an irony, and it was something that Fire the Free Speech organization in their Friend of the Court brief talked about, and they are very much on the side of free speech. I think they're a very solid and consistent and principled organization. They pointed out that they take the side of free speech, even though some of the Republicans who are behind this suit and what constrained the Biden administration's ability are sort of on the other side in these other free speech cases that we talked about, where they want to give states the power to censor and control speech. So there is an irony here, implicit in the Republican position. But to me, this isn't a right-left Republican-Democrat thing. This really does come down to the First Amendment. And you can see by the unanimity in the court here that it's not a left-right Republican-Democrat thing, and it appears that they're very likely to come down on the wrong side of this one.
It's particularly Justices Kavanaugh and Kagan, both of who worked. Kagan, for example, was the Solicitor General under Barack Obama. Kavanaugh worked as a political operative in the Bush White House. Both of them were taking a line of questioning which was very, very heavily slanted towards executive power. We can put this next one, please, up on the screen, because I found one write-up actually very illuminating from Justice Amy Coney Barrett, where she asks in a hypothetical where if any Louisiana government officials were, say, doxxed, followed by social media posts about how people should rally and do something about this, could the FBI, she queried, quote, really encourage social media platforms to take down these posts? Now, the Solicitor General of the state said, well, no, because if what the FBI is trying to do is trying to persuade a speech intermediary to take down a private third-party speech, that would be an abridgment of speech, to which Justice Barrett did not agree with that line of questioning. And, I mean, that's ridiculous for a number of reasons. Number one, doxing is already against the, is a violation of the terms of service of all of these platforms. Why would the FBI, quote, need to encourage it? And this is the whole point. If you just have a consistent set of rules, then the government has to operate under the same rules as everybody else. But when you have this hodgepodge system, and this really gets to both the failure of social media regulation as well as government action, well, then the government, with its immense leverage and its power, I mean, look, if any of us who have ever been on the receiving end of a phone call from the White House with that infamous no caller ID or from the EOP address is like, whoa, every single time anyone that comes in, I don't care if you're in the media, I don't care if you see it regularly, every time you see it, you pay attention. You have to pay attention whenever you're Twitter, whenever you're Facebook, or any of these other organizations. We saw so many of this, Crystal, during the Twitter files. Remember the FBI flagging all of those ridiculous posts? Yes. And I mean, yeah, they'd find one guy with 6 followers who'd be like, hey guys, the election's on Wednesday. And they're like, hey, you gotta take this down.
You gotta shut this down.
You gotta shut this thing down. And guess what? They actually did it though. They really did do it. And if anything, it's very concerning that these justices are not taking into account that the vast majority of the time they do comply with what the government wants them to do, and especially here in the COVID case, because this is even in a heightened environment. I think we talked a little bit about this yesterday. For example, in the constituents being blocked case, where in the middle of a lockdown, you had a guy who was critical of his local, I forget who it was. It was like the city manager or something like that. of their lockdown policy, and the guy blocked him. And it's like, well, if you're in the middle of a lockdown, you only have the ability to communicate and to articulate some of these things online, as some of these cases were happening, then your ability to express yourself freely online without government censorship becomes even more important. So really imagine this in a heightened, like a wartime scenario, a pandemic scenario, where government power is even more expanded than normal, and they're really coming down on the ability of the executive to just do what they want. I think it's a real travesty.
They absolutely are. It sort of reminds me of the way that they have so narrowly defined corruption.
Oh, good point.
Where it literally has to be like, Sagar, here is some money in exchange for doing this thing for me, and then you do the thing, and it's like in writing and on video, and it has to be that direct. It seems like if you did have some direct government threat or coercion of like, you know, Facebook, we're going to break you up if you don't take down that post saying election day is on Wednesday instead of being on Tuesday, then maybe they would say, okay, that's inappropriate. But if they're just, you know, having some friendly meetings, some coffees where they're yelling at them every day and swearing at them and pressuring them, but there's no direct coercion, then that's okay. It's this sort of very narrow defining of what would be inappropriate here that does remind me of the way that they have ruled with regard to corruption. Just to break down a little bit more of sort of the technical legal pieces of this case, and this was reflected in that SCOTUS blog piece, there's basically three potential, you know, decision points in terms of how they will rule. One is always this question of standing, whether the parties who sued even have grounds to sue, whether they were actually injured. There's some question about that because these are, you know, states that brought this suit. States don't technically have First Amendment rights. It applies to citizens, so there's some question about that. Then there's the merits themselves, and then there's the idea that the original ruling that came from an appeals court was too broad because it applied to all social media platforms when the individuals in question were not using all social media platforms. So the government is saying, okay, even if you find with them, the judgment should be very limited to just the social media platforms that were involved here. So those are sort of the three main pieces that SCOTUS blog breaks down. They're going to have to make decisions on, and they appear to even be skeptical of this question of standing, Sagar.
Yeah, I mean, that's where, look, the danger of it from the ruling, and it does seem very, very likely that this is going down at a pretty big margin, is that the government, both the Biden administration, possibly a future Trump administration, can call up Facebook, can call up any of these people and tell them to take stuff down. Now, obviously, they can't force them, but, you know, Glenn Greenwald made a really good point about how Mark Zuckerberg, you know, publicly had talked, both, I think on the Lex Friedman podcast, on the Joe Rogan podcast as well, about how the FBI is coming to them all the time with all of this, you know, fakery. And that's what led to the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was a 100% true story. It was preempted by government action. It wasn't just the private bureaucrats at Twitter. So yeah, go ahead.
One last point, just to drive it home. We'll leave the TikTok debate for another day.
Okay,
but you agree with me that the reason that the TikTok thing has legs right now is because they're upset about the pro-Palestine view.
Oh, no question. Yeah,
that rules the day on TikTok. You don't think they will use these powers, or may even right now be using these powers to quash pro-Palestinian debate and viewpoints on a wide variety of social media platforms? That is absolutely possible that that's happening right now. And the Supreme Court could be siding with the government to say, yes, that's appropriate. Yes, you have an interest in doing that, et cetera. If Trump gets back in the White House, I mean, if you don't like Donald, maybe you love Joe Biden and you're comfy with him having these powers, put the shoe on the other foot and think about the way that Donald Trump and his administration could use these powers to quash any sort of debate and dissent that they find uncomfortable and they don't like. You do not want to hand the guy, this is like, you know, what we learned with the Patriot Act. You don't want to hand the government these types of powers when it comes to core key liberties that are supposed to be enshrined in the Constitution vis-a-vis our citizens. So this looks like a very, very dire and distressing direction that they're going in.
That's well said. You're right. You can apply it to everything. Ukraine, Palestine, and pick your issue. That's something, if it's controversial, you can guarantee that the government is involved.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.